So this is our 80th year anniversary for AAPS, and we're still going strong, and Dr. Jane Orient is a big reason why. It's very difficult to keep up with all the work that Jane puts out. She gets up very early in the morning, and it's looking for responses to a whole bunch of things that we're working on. So 80 years, wow. AAPS is really the oldest organization on the right side of the political spectrum in the United States and maybe the world. There's no one who's older than AAPS, dating back to 1943. You can think of the other ones, Cato and so on, but none of them go back nearly as far as AAPS. And a lot of organizations come up and go and disappear. But to keep going strong after 80 years, that's really something, and thanks to all of you. We're in this together, and we need each other. We're in a time of crisis right now. So let me start with a little bit of humor, though. 85 years ago was when Orson Welles did his War of the Worlds radio show, almost to the day today. It was just before Halloween, and Orson Welles dramatized the landing of Martians in New Jersey. And being from New Jersey, I mean, I immediately knew that's not true. They're not going to come to New Jersey, right, Renee, Alita? No, they're not coming to New Jersey. They're still there, okay. But when that show aired, Orson Welles, he knew how to ham things up. And even though there was a disclaimer in it, he hammed it up. And he was like, oh, we have breaking news here. Just coming over the wire. Ooh, wait a minute, there's a flying saucer that's landed in New Jersey. They're going to take New York City. And then he had reporters, and he'd go to somebody in New York City. We got someone there on the ground in New York City. You know, Jack, you there? Do you hear us? Yeah, Jack, what's it look like? Well, I got these aliens who are coming right at me. Jack, are you okay? Jack, Jack, Jack. And then the line goes dead. And this terrified the country. The country's in panic. You can read about it now, and nobody remembers it now. But my mother was 14 years old, my mother, Phyllis Schlafly, and she was babysitting that night. 14 years old with a little infant there. And she's sitting at home, and she's listening to it, I guess. And her mother calls her up and says, we're going to come right home. There's panic here. There's something going on. We don't know what the truth is. We don't know. And my mother, at the age of 14, said, no, it's fake news. Okay, so to more serious topic, but also a bunch of crazies, and those are the people at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And we're fighting them, and no one has ever fought the FDA in court the way AAPS has. And courts for decades have deferred to the FDA. It's like there's some type of God, you just can't touch them, sacred cow, whatever term you want to use. Courts have just rolled over for the FDA every time there's an issue. Oh, this is what the FDA says. Okay, well, we're just a court. We're just a court. If it's anything else, courts are locking people up for decades. With the FDA, oh, no, we're just, do what you want, do what you want. So we were involved in a lawsuit that challenged the misconduct of the FDA when it interfered with ivermectin during COVID. So COVID's over, but there's some accountability that still needs to happen. And the FDA interfered with ivermectin, and you all know what I'm talking about. They put out statements that disparaged ivermectin and said, you are not a horse, meaning you shouldn't receive ivermectin, that's merely a horse drug. And this was then used by hospitals to block giving ivermectin to patients. This was used to go after doctors, medical boards, to go after doctors who are using ivermectin, even though ivermectin, of course, was a fully approved, safe medication by the FDA. They had no valid criticism of it. And everyone knows that safe, approved medications can be prescribed off-label. And the FDA knows that, but they acted like that's not true. They acted like, well, we haven't approved this for treating COVID. They know they don't approve for every new use. They know that. They were deceptive, and they overstepped their power. So a lawsuit was brought against him in Texas. We were involved in it. We filed an amicus brief to the district court. District court judge, who was supposed to be good, he let the FDA win there at that level, then went up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which is the best court in our country now. Sits in New Orleans. And the court looked at that. We filed another brief in the case at the appellate level. And it's a strong brief. And, a lot of pent-up frustration at the FDA on my part, and I let them have it. And they say, oh, we didn't, they come into court. We know that they were interfering. They know they were interfering. They come into court and say, no, we weren't doing anything here. We were just commenting here and there. We didn't want people to go and buy horse, packaged for animals and be using that. That's all we were doing. And no, they were doing a lot more than that. They were interfering with it. And I pointed out that many courts cited the FDA in blocking ivermectin to COVID patients in the hospitals. Many courts said, this is what the FDA says, so no, we're going to side with the hospital, and the patients don't get it. If they get stuck in a hospital, they didn't get it. You probably know some patients who died in hospitals because they couldn't get ivermectin. And Fifth Circuit looked at this, and some Trump-appointed judges there on that panel, and they looked at this, and they really ripped into the FDA, in an opinion. It was a terrific victory there in the Fifth Circuit. And one of the things they said in response to the FDA's famous statement on social media, come on, you're not a horse, the Fifth Circuit said, FDA, and this was basically taken from our brief, the Fifth Circuit said, FDA, you're not a physician. Yeah. And so now that case is going back to the trial level, and we're going to get discovery, and we're going to hold the FDA accountable for all the people it harmed. And it's continuing to harm people in other areas, too. We're involved in another case where the FDA is interfering with adult stem cell treatment. The FDA's position is if a physician extracts adult stem cells from a patient and then injects it back in the same patient, even in the same procedure, the FDA says, no, you can't do that. You've got to get our approval to do that. Extracting stem cells from the same patient and putting it back in the same patient. FDA says you need the FDA's approval. It has to be approved as a drug, which they'll never do. And how could you do that anyway? It's individualized to the patient. So we filed a brief on that. That's in the Ninth Circuit. We pointed out that over the years, the FDA has harmed a lot of people by keeping certain drugs on the market for decades, like DES, that medication for pregnant women. They kept it on the market from 1941 to 2000, even though there were reports, even when they first approved it, that that's a dangerous drug. They just kept it on, kept it out there. And they've harmed people in other ways. The opioid crisis. The Fifth Circuit is now looking at the FDA and saying, the FDA, I mean, if these opioids, if OxyContin's not such a great drug, why did you approve it? I mean, let's look at how you approved it. So we're starting to get new scrutiny of the FDA, and AAPS has been a leader in that. And thanks to you for your support so we can file the briefs and the lawsuits against the FDA. We sued the FDA early on in COVID to get them to stop interfering with hydroxychloroquine. Our suit was really the first suit, and RFK Jr. talks about it in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and we sought to get the court to rule against the FDA then. The court would not rule against the FDA in that early case by us, but it did set a precedent that the Sixth Circuit recently used our case when it ruled 2-1 in favor of laws in Kentucky and Tennessee against these transgender operations on children. So it's funny, even though we didn't win the hydroxychloroquine case, we set a good precedent about how medicine is basically governed at the state level, not by the federal government. And that precedent then became useful to the Sixth Circuit, which sits in Cincinnati, to uphold these laws against what it is the mutilation of sex organs for children. And so that was gratifying to see that our legal work, even when we don't always win the case, we are able to establish a principle that then becomes helpful in another case. And that was just a 2-to-1 victory. That transgender issue, maybe some of you are seeing that, but apparently there are more than 100 clinics now in the country that are doing these transgender operations on children. There's reports that it's doubled just in the last few years the number of children who want to be the opposite sex. The media and big money is pushing this, of course, and the opinion itself, we won 2-to-1, but it's still, the language they use in the opinion, you just have to scratch your head how they use this euphemistic language like, well, these are transitioning treatments. No, that's not really what I would call it. These are surgeries that are marring people for life, and children cannot consent to that. So it was nice that our litigation at least helped to establish this one precedent, which was the first appellate decision on this. So you're going to see more cases on this transgender issue. It'll eventually go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court appears to be afraid of it. They're afraid to touch it. Oh, I don't know. It's a hot potato. We'll duck that as long as we can. That appears to be the attitude of our Supreme Court. In the prosecution of physicians, this has continued. And Jane Orient wrote about this 30 years ago, the war on doctors. And it's going on. And there are a lot of physicians now who are being locked up for 20 years in the pain management realm. So one of them is a Dr. Zulu Ruan, and he writes me from his prison there in Louisiana, Oakdale, Louisiana, and he shares with me the research that he's able to uncover there while he's serving a 20-year sentence. He's a good doctor to whom the feds did an undercover operation on him, and he passed it with flying colors. They put in a fake patient, they tried to entrap him. No, he didn't fall for it, he passed with flying colors. But he was doing high volume of pain management, and the mentality of the government now is if you're doing high volume, then we're going to go after you. That seems to be what they're doing. And they'll go into court and say, well, this fellow was the #1 prescriber of this particular pain medication in the state. Well, yeah, there's always a #1 prescriber. I mean, it doesn't mean he's guilty of anything. They're just playing emotional rhetoric then. So we won on the first trip to the Supreme Court. We got a 9-0 reversal, and the Supreme Court said that before you convict a doctor, you better prove that he intentionally tried to do something that he knew was unauthorized. He had to know it was unauthorized. Well, the government's not really paying any attention to that new standard. And it came back down, and the government said, well, we're going to continue to keep him in jail for 20 years. So now it's going back to the Supreme Court. We filed another brief, and we need to get the Supreme Court to intervene against this weaponization of government with these criminal prosecutions. It's just way out of hand, and you see it in the political realm, too. And I'll get to that a little bit later. But it's gotten to the point where the DOJ prosecutes anybody they want at any time, demanding huge prison sentences, interfering with elections, and the judges are saying it's fine. It's fine. And of course, most of the victims are people who are independent doctors, people who believe in the free market, people who are on sort of the right side of the political spectrum, whereas people on the other side of the political spectrum, no, they don't seem to get prosecuted for anything, no matter how bad their conduct is. So it's a real problem. It's created a real crisis in our country. Meanwhile, we have a case against the specialty boards. Now, these specialty boards have started to play this game themselves, and they've started to retaliate against doctors based on public statements that the specialty boards, really the Biden administration or whoever, the vaccine manufacturers, don't like statements by certain doctors, so the specialty boards are going after their board certification. So ABIM is doing this to a number of physicians. ABFM has been doing this to fewer physicians. ABOG has posted threatening statements on its website about going after physicians who take public stances that ABOG doesn't like. And so we've sued all three of them. And we've pointed out to the court, it's now before the Fifth Circuit where we think we'll get a fair hearing, that these specialty boards are businesses, private businesses, that work with the government and get money and encouragement from the government that certify doctors based primarily on a multiple choice exam. That's primarily what it is. There are some oral exams. Usually those are easier and there's a higher pass rate. But primarily these are businesses that certify on a multiple choice exam. Where do they get the right to retaliate against doctors who testify before legislative committees, who give honest advice to their patients, who make public statements on social media, who speak out, who participate in our political process? That's completely improper for them to be doing that, to be abusing their monopoly, to go after and retaliate against doctors for political purposes. And I think we got a good chance in this case in the Fifth Circuit. And we've thrown in the Biden administration. We didn't want them to feel left out. And we said, where do you get the right to talk to social media and tell social media to take down postings by physicians? It's similar to another case that's out there. But ours is a little bit different. Ours is focused primarily on medicine. Where do you get the right, Biden, to be a ministry of truth and to have people working on retaliating against physicians for political or social purposes? Now, after we sued, the Biden administration then disbanded their Disinformation Governance Board. It was after we sued. They didn't disband it before we sued. After we sued, we disbanded. But we then discovered that buried in their paperwork when they disbanded it, they had a statement there that, well, we can disband it because we're already doing this in other departments. Oh, you're going to continue to do it. Okay. So you didn't really stop the violation of the Constitution, did you? And so we're waiting for their response on our appeal on this. They asked for more time to try to respond to our papers. I think it's a strong case, and I think we're going to level the playing field again. I mean, where do these powers that be think that they could get away with this, retaliating against physicians? We're not going to let them get away with it. And with your help, we're going to continue to fight on that issue to protect the doctors who earned their board certification. You earned it. You paid for it. It's like taking away your diploma. What if your medical school, your college, starts to, because some trolls contacted him and complained about something you said on the internet, what if you got contacted by your college, your medical school, and said, we're going to retract your diploma? That's yours. You earned it. So we're going to fight until we win these cases, and we're going to restore freedom in medicine. Talk for a little bit about gag orders here. So this is a new weapon in their arsenal, the weaponization of government, the gag orders. So they realize that when we speak out, that a lot of people agree with us. So they're going to start to gag us. And when they do retaliation against somebody, they're going to gag people so they can't talk about it. So we're here in Texas, and all of you from Texas, I'm sure, heard about the impeachment of Ken Paxton that they tried to push through. He was impeached in the House, has something to do in the House, and they tried to remove him in the Senate. And you may not have heard that as part of that process, they gagged all of the representatives and senators there in Austin, people who represent you here in Texas. They had a gag order to keep them from speaking about it. Completely improper and a violation of their constitutional rights, a violation of all Texans' constitutional rights to hear what they say. And one of our members courageously sued to challenge that gag order and point out that it's unconstitutional And I'd just like to recognize him here. Dr. Stephen Hotze, you all should know from Houston. So I helped out. We took that up to the Fifth Circuit, and we fought that and got a lot of double talk from the Fifth Circuit. We drew an unlucky panel, and they started issuing decisions without opinions. They wouldn't even give a reason. They'd just say, no, we rule against this motion by us. And they wouldn't give a reason because there is no reason. There's no justification for a gag order like that. It interferes with the whole concept of our republic, Republican representation, and a democratic form of government. But an example of where if you fight the fight, you may not win the battle you thought you'd win, but we won the war, didn't we? And he's back in office, and he's filing good lawsuits for us. So now they're gagging Donald Trump. And you may have followed this. This is in the news. Multiple judges have gagged Donald Trump. And one of the tricks they play, these judges, because they don't like to be criticized. And they don't like to be criticized by Donald Trump. And I can understand that, but it's not right. It's not constitutional. And if you don't want to be criticized, don't go into public life. And these judges, they try to silence him from criticizing, from Trump criticizing them. And what they do is they'll say, well, Mr. Trump, you can't criticize anyone on our staff. We're concerned about our staff. What those judges are really doing is they're censoring criticism of themselves. And he's fighting those, and he's continuing to speak out, and we'll see how that unfolds. But I wanted to give you this news that not everybody's heard, and I'm not sure you've heard this, Dr. Hotze, but somebody filed a brief on the side of Donald Trump on this issue of opposing these gag orders that I don't think any of us would have expected. Just came out of the blue in the last 24 hours. You know what I'm talking about, Dr. Hotze? The ACLU filed on the side of Donald Trump. And they said, Your Honor, that gag order is unconstitutional. Reverse it. And they pointed out, using a lot of the same arguments we used, Dr. Hotze, maybe they saw our brief, I don't know. But they said people have a right to hear. When you gag someone like Trump or the Texas senators or Texas representatives, you're interfering with the right of the people to hear what they have to say. And that's a constitutional right too. It's not just Donald Trump's right to speak, it's the right of everyone to hear what he has to say. And the ACLU, of course, they go in there and they say, we don't agree with anything he says. But we do have a right to hear it. We have a right to hear what he has to say, and all Americans do. And the ACLU pointed out that this judge gagged Donald Trump from criticizing the prosecutors. And the judge said, I'm going to gag you from criticizing your prosecutors because I'm afraid something bad might happen and some Trump supporter might do something improper to one of these prosecutors. And again, that's double talk that sort of sounds good for the media, public concern about public safety. No, the real reason is because Trump's criticisms are effective. I think he called the prosecutors thugs at one point, and that rings true, unfortunately. And the ACLU came in there and said, listen, you have a right to criticize prosecutors, and if someone else happens to hear it and do something bad, I mean, nobody wants that, but that's not a reason to infringe on the First Amendment. You have a right to criticize, and everyone in this room should remember that too. We all have a First Amendment right to speak out, and we need to speak out more to save our country. So, good sign that the ACLU has come on board there. Okay, I was able to go to a dinner that was held at Donald Trump's Country Club, which is also in New Jersey. And we expected maybe a cameo appearance by Donald Trump. We weren't sure, but he did show up, and I was able to meet with him briefly. And this concerns a lot of the other victims of these prosecutions. And sometimes he comments on it, sometimes he doesn't. He didn't speak at this particular dinner about what he's going to do, but he has said on other occasions, when he gets into office, he's going to be pardoning a lot of people. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about the pardon power of the president, but it is complete. it extends to all crimes. I've studied this. He can pardon for state crimes. He can pardon the folks in Atlanta who've been caught up in that sham prosecution. And if he gets reelected, it's going to be a new way to deal with these overzealous prosecutors. And there's going to be a healthy exercise of the pardon power that not only pardons them, but explains how improper these prosecutions are and the abuse of our justice system to go after someone's political opponents. So I'm hopeful that if Trump gets back into power, that I will find a way to get into a pardon committee in the Trump administration, and I guarantee you that if I get in there, there are going to be many, many pardons. And that's going to be where the attention is, and that's where there's going to be a lot of correction of these injustices. Too many prior Republican presidents have been reluctant to use the pardon power. And part of that, I figured out, is because some of the prior Republican presidents have used prosecutions for their own benefit. That these presidents, they kind of, they seem to benefit from some of these prosecutions. I don't know if you noticed that, if you really studied that, but there needs to be a much broader use of the pardon power, and there will be. That's the Constitution's solution to this. The Constitution has a solution to just about every crisis our country faces. You just have to sometimes look hard and reread it a couple times, and the pardon power of the president is the solution to these weaponized prosecutions. And there are going to be doctors who were pardoned too. These doctors who were sitting in jail for 20 years trying to help patients, they're coming out too, with statements about how improper those prosecutions are. Unfortunately, the jury system in our country has really kind of broken down in some of these political cases, where leftists will try to get on these juries. And leftists, some of them will even lie to get on some of these juries. And all of the Trump cases, the juries have convicted every time, 100% conviction rate, and that's unheard of. And it's because the left understands they can get on juries and they can do a lot of harm that way. So we need to educate people on our side, your patients at all, encourage them to get on juries and encourage them to be strong on a jury and not be outwitted by leftists who get in there and not be afraid of the process. That's what we need to have more of. All of us need to do that. So I'd like to close by saying that we are in a time of crisis and we all need each other. AAPS is going to lead us out of this crisis and save our country as it has in many other crises. Some of you may not know that a person who I feel certain benefited from AAPS's work back in the 60s and 70s was a fellow by the name of Dr. Loyal Davis, who was a physician, and he was Nancy Reagan's father. So he was Ronald Reagan's father-in-law. And it is documented that Ronald Reagan got a lot of his ideas from this physician who was his father-in-law and really admired his father-in-law. And Dr. Loyal Davis almost certainly got his ideas from AAPS. So we carried our country through crises in the 70s and the 80s, and AAPS will continue to get us through this crisis today. So thank you very much for being here. Yes, at the end, I think. At the end, we'll have a panel. So let me now introduce Dr. Larry Horan. And another personal note about my mother, Phyllis Schlafly, who some of you knew. She spoke to AAPS back in the 50s, 1950s, and was very fond of this organization. And one day she got a letter or a phone call from someone she did not know, and his name was Dr. Larry Horan. And Larry called my mother or wrote her a letter and said, I'd like to get more involved, concerned about my country. I'd like to get involved in a good organization. What can I do? Can I get involved in your organization or whatever? And my mother said, well, Larry, why don't you check out this organization, AAPS? And it was my mother who referred Larry to AAPS, and he's been helping build our organization, doing good work for 30 years here now.